So I could not be happier to be here today, and I feel like it's my coming out party. The IANDS local group had found me and brought me into the fold, so I especially thank Damon and Jackie and that group. But they said, Val, just let it rip. So I guess I've been told there's a lot of basic types of introductions of quantum physics and how it helps explain our experiences, but there hasn't been anything that got a little deeper. So I'm going to give you that, but let me just kind of maybe get a show of hands. How many people actually prefer things stay basic? How many people prefer that I go deeper? All right, awesome. I am so in the right place. I can't even tell you. So I'm an experiencer, probably from can't hear? Can you guys turn it up more, or I'll just speak louder? If I'm speaking louder, is that good? Is that good? Even louder. Should I yell? Okay, sounds good. So I've always been an experiencer. I've always felt presence and had many, many spiritually transformative experiences, but probably the one that headed me into quantum physics was, believe it or not, in the 6th grade. And I remember that day we had learned about atoms, and so I went home doing my homework, and I'm thinking about all these little spheres in space, and I kept wondering, well, how is it that that one atom knows that it's part of the chair, and how is it that that other atom knows that it's part of my butt sitting on that chair? And that question has driven me the rest of my life. So of course I knew all is life, alive and conscious, but the spiritual downloads, as everybody in this room has probably had, you know, they're amazing. So it's really just given me more of an appreciation of the geometric and multidimensional aspect of these energies that we're swimming in. And again, I keep going to quantum physics to help even me explain them for myself. So the other thing is being spiritual from such a young age, and I would also go to the Bible and all different kinds of, spiritual parallel texts. And I just remember wondering, hearing God is light, God is love. And I remember thinking, well, how do we translate that in our language today? And this too has driven my search. So we hear our spiritually transformative experiences, our near-death experiences. We keep hearing we must be crazy, they're impossible. Of course, that does drive us crazy when people tell us that. And you know what? If the nature of reality really were only this time and space, and if there really were only electromagnetic energy, then we understand why they're saying it's impossible, because electromagnetism really is the domain of time and space. And that is the classical physics view, isn't it? But you know what? If the nature of reality really is multidimensional and holographic, and that it is extended beyond space and time, well then that we have to go to modern quantum physics for, and certainly the theory of relativity. For those of you in this room who probably know William Tiller, he's this amazing, basically this physicist who's done all kinds of work with conditioned spaces and getting experienced meditators to imprint random event generators. And he's done amazing work. And he about the language of quantum physics, he says, you know what, as we evolve to higher and higher states of consciousness, it is necessary for us to invent new words. So he gives us permission to be a little fuzzy as we go along the way. He reminds us that we all have a little experience in this territory, and that no matter who we're talking to anyway, they're likely to be at some different area of the bandwidth anyway. So he basically gives us permission to use the language of quantum physics. Now, today, I'm also going to give you a big picture perspective, because if anybody today wanted to dive into quantum physics and start reading some of the professional journals that are out there relating to consciousness, whether it's OR or some of the other ones, they're really hard to understand if you don't understand what came before. So I'm going to go through it quickly. I'm not going to dwell on the historical perspective, but as I go through it kind of quickly, you're going to see the buzzwords and how it's imprinted in the language that's being used today in the journal articles. I do want you to have an understanding by the time you leave here today of where are we now with things, about understanding our wave-particle duality of all matter, the fact that we really are light, even according to science, that we are interconnected multidimensionally, holographically, and I'm going to explain why the hologram is so important for us. They have confirmed non-local spooky action at a distance. They've confirmed quantum oscillations within the tubulins of the microtubules within the neurons, especially with respect to the dendritic network. We're seeing the brain more as an energy receiver transmitter. And by the time we get some of these buzzwords in place, we will have a language for discussing our experiences. I'm also going to hopefully leave myself time to give you a map of consciousness, not because you don't have one, but because sometimes we all need to be on the same page as we're talking about something. From an integrative psychology standpoint, because I'm an integrative psychotherapist I've been honored to have all these amazing higher consciousness clients come to me, and I kind of see what's going on repeatedly and what has helped them. So I'm also going to define consciousness from my standpoint, talk about common categories of struggle, and also give some guidance to some healthcare professionals. So for mystical experience, as we know, look at the language that describes them. We're talking about these non-local experiences, the fact that there's odd energy shifts out there, synchronicities, things that seem more of a collective movement, realms of energy, light, color, sound. Near-death experience elements, the same thing. I experienced the void, I experienced the vacuum. My body was one of energy and color. Beings of light, radiating amazing light energy and just infusing us with the most amazing love that we cannot even put into words, right? Cities and landscapes of light, feelings of rising up into the cosmos. And certainly those life reviews and experiences that sometimes we say were like 360 degrees because we were in every speck as well as the whole. And again, why the hologram and understanding that is so important. Also, how thoughts drive motion and communication, right? As soon as there's a thought, we're communicating. As soon as there's a thought about going somewhere else, we go somewhere else. So what is this light? What is this love? And what is the healing connection to the body? So William Blair, Department of Physics and Astronomy at Johns Hopkins, he's an astrophysicist, he said, you know what, simply stated, light is nature's way of transferring energy through space. So we can complicate it like we're going to do today, but really remember, light is energy. I would add that light moves not only energy, but information too through space. And this movement unfolds and enfolds like music from an accordion as consciousness and love in all its multidimensional forms, from the quantum field of potentiality to our physical reality. So energy. If you try to go and look it up, what they actually mean by the word energy, most often you'll run into the phrase capacity to do work. Well, I don't know about you, but I didn't really find that so helpful of a definition. I'm really, really glad to tell you that we're okay using the word power because that's how we feel it. That word is going to be more intuitive and it's actually accurate scientifically. What kinds of light and energy are moving? Well, most commonly we know about the electromagnetic field. Not as many people know about torsion, but electromagnetism does follow the rules of time and space. So those of us who have had non-local experiences, we need to look to the scientists that are helping us understand. And for our purposes in this room, and for those of you watching afar, it's helpful for us to know that there are scientists out there like MIT Claude Swanson, who's really written extensively about torsion fields, but at least to know that there's a certain kind of energy like torsion, which has to do with spin, but we'll come back to that. But it is non-local, and it's actually been correlated with all those experiences like precognitions, remote viewing, and things that defy our otherwise common sense. So in electromagnetism, when it comes to linking the quantum with our biology, there are those electric potentials, and then we do have a somewhat other coherent aspect in a broad range of frequencies. And so in that lower realm of frequencies, you're going to hear things in the literature talked about like the foliage field, but you're also going to hear things in the higher frequencies like the pop photon field. And interconnecting these two aspects is a sense of coupling. And I'm going to use the metaphor probably more than once today about thinking about dolphins that are swimming together synchronistically, right? So waves are moving up and down, and there's a lot of, we're going to talk about the role of the magic that happens when two or more are gathered, right? When we're literally resonating at the same wavelength, magic happens. So that kind of coupling is what starts interconnecting these disparate bands of energy. So the quantum view is really many diverse theories. It's not one theory, and there's no way any of us can know all the theories. There's no way all the people in quantum physics know one another's theories. But we do know a few things for sure. So for example, all things do have a wave-particle duality. And why is that important? We're going to talk about that. But behind all material reality is a wave and an energy reality. Not only that, it is the energy reality. It is the frequency domain, the spectral domain, that gives rise to physical form. So if you've ever seen someone shifting shape right in front of your eyes because they're channeling someone, we can start understanding they are channeling a different energy that has different information. Their form is changing. We're going to talk about how we know time and space are relative now. It's not absolute. Consciousness as a fundamental field, Larry, Evan, different people talking about that. Even early quantum physics fathers have talked about that. And we are going to talk about quantum holographic theories that are out there, starting with David Bohm and then Carl Pribram's work, and how there's an implicate non-local order that's embedded within an explicit or local manifest order. So how do we get here, and how does light relate to consciousness and love from a scientific perspective? All right, so bear with me, because I'm not going to leave you hanging in the complicated. I'm going to bring down and simplify, but here we go to give you a historical perspective. And I apologize that there's going to be a lot of words on the screens, but I'm going to highlight some things for you. All right, so consider that in 1800, okay, that's kind of been a while now, right? That's when Thomas Young, 1805, if anybody's heard about the double slit experiments, that's where it came from. And that's when Thomas Young realized that light is a wave. And just like if I throw a pebble into a water in two places and you'll see those waves merge, they are creating an interference pattern, and light does the same thing. So that's how we found out that light is a wave. Next thing you know, we're finding out that electric currents, which really were known about in BC, but now we're realizing how they're making compass needles jump, and now we're starting to grasp the reality of an electromagnetic field. Then we find out that energy states are discrete rather than continuous, and that is a huge significance for the quantum world. It was 1900 when Max Planck came up with his quantum hypothesis and basically was able to show us how these discrete energy chunks, if you will, are related to frequencies, meaning the speed of their vibration. So Albert Einstein, 1905, is often called his miracle year, and he was able to say, as he was looking at the photoelectric effect, hey, wait a minute, light's not just a wave, but it can be quantized as a particle, and therefore that's how the photon and the idea of a photon was born. He also said these energy quanta must have momentum and act like a particle, and that's what led to the idea of the wave-particle duality. He also said atoms are harmonic oscillators, and we'll certainly talk about the importance of that when it comes to these musical, multidimensional, and holographic realities. He came up, obviously, with his theory of relativity, both special and general theory. It was when he was doing his special theory of relativity that he came up with the math that led to E equals mc squared, the energy mass equivalence. There he was thinking about the physical relativity of motion. The general theory, often a lot of times people talk about the gravitational theory, but really the profound effect was how time and space are relative. But it had other impacts, didn't it? Certainly in psychology in my field, because Carl Jung saw Einstein lecturing. Next thing you know, they're having dinner, and he's starting to think about psychic conditionality and synchronicity. The word torsion was coined in 1913 by Cartan, and he started noticing that this twisting movement through the fabric of space-time was kind of maybe important. Resonance effects in microbes went back to the 20s and 30s, and we're just now, kind of capitalizing on that today. Next thing you know, there's a theory of matter waves. Notice the combination of language, matter waves. And then, of course, Hubble blew open the door, and all of a sudden, the Milky Way galaxy wasn't the universe. We found out the reality is way bigger than we ever thought. In the early 20s, especially 1927, was really considered the birth of quantum mechanics, and basically that's very associated with a lot of mathematical equations. But I will point out that sometimes three of these things are kind of confused: the uncertainty principle, the observer effect, and complementarity principle. In short, for us in this room, know that the observer effect, because of all those double slit experiments, as we know, it kept showing the observer's effect and consciousness's effect on reality. But about that time, Bohr said, you know what? These quantum objects seem to have these complementary properties, and you just can't measure and observe, these pairs at the same time. And Heisenberg came along with a similar but slightly different part of the principle, and that was, there's a limit to the precision in which we can measure any one of these at one time when it comes to these complementary properties, such as position and momentum. Then, of course, Paul Dirac worked to unify the quantum mechanics of the math with special relativity, and basically describe things, especially the movement of the electron, in terms of a wave function. So you're going to notice when I get us over to modern theory why we can't quite shake that wave function thing, even though for us it doesn't seem very intuitive. And then you get into all these quantum field quantum field theories. And then in 1948, that's when Gabor invented the holographic method and was able to develop a hologram. And so then that's when it influenced the thinking of Karl Pribram and David Bohm, who worked closely with one another, and they came up with their own holographic hypotheses and what have you that I'll talk about in a little bit more. In 82 is when quantum entanglement was verified. In 84, obviously double slit experiments keep happening, and that's when we figured out it worked backwards in time, too. In 1995 is when Penrose and Hameroff first came up with their OR theory, which is a quantum theory of human consciousness. And we'll talk more about the evolutions of that, including where they are today with that. But in 2003, they started showing quantum coherence in warm biological systems. And the reason that's actually important to us is because if you're kind of doing this bottom-up approach, that's just where we are right now, but we can't even determine that there's quantum processing happening in biology if we don't think quantum can exist in a warm temperature. Well, they were able to find out that it could. Nassim Haramein is, sometimes I'm thinking of him as well as I think a lot of us are starting to think of him as the current day Einstein. He's coming up with all kinds of things, and I'm actually not going to get into his stuff too much, but there are a few things I want to mention because of how important it is to understanding our holographic consciousness. First of all, he's really showing the role of the proton is acting like a mini black hole. And he's been able to link it with quantum gravity in his theories. He's also looking at the origin of spin, which for those of us who are interested in the developments about these torsion fields, this nonlocal energy, that's going to be important. And then particularly fascinating I found is that he's trying to relate quantum theory and theory of relativity, and he's doing so with this dual torus topology. Now, for those of us in this room that are familiar with heart math, and I'm sure that's most of us, we have found out that the heart is a torus field. And when you really think of the chakras and how they're in our energy bodies, really sometimes we picture them as cones coming out the front and the back, but to me, I get the vision of the dual torus topology. So I'm so excited he's doing this line of work. Tony Fleming really helping us understand the role of biophotons in the binding process. That's particularly important. 2010 is when they have the particle accelerators come online, and at that point in time they're able to show that there is a presence of this oscillating field at a quantum level. 2011, the Penrose and Hameroff gravity model get updated. And those of you who have heard of Anirban Bandyopadhyay, he was able to show that quantum vibrations are within the turbulence. But the way he would talk to us is that life is really about clocks within clocks within clocks. And it makes sense when you realize that at this quantum level, we're this energy's packets that are vibrating, oscillating, all having their own rhythm, and we're all finding how to dance together and along such a great frequency band. Anyway, amazing work. Dean Radin, most of you have maybe followed his work on nonlocal observer effects, and he's getting some 5 sigma results, which apparently wins some people Nobel Prizes, but they haven't quite done that for Dean yet. Dean Radin also tells us that though some healers get remarkable results, I guess we still have a lot of science to do when it comes to distance healing and clinical efficacy. And it makes sense to me because when we look in the literature, I notice that they're also combining a lot of different modalities in some of the same studies even. And 2015, some good information on the biofield from a physics perspective. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about Nassim's current thing that's come out. He's talking about the unified space memory network from cosmogenesis to consciousness. And essentially, he's trying to tell us that information and geometry are what are primary, and that space-time is a holographic structure, and that consciousness essentially is involving this dynamic feedback of information going from one domain to another. And obviously, we know it's all happening at the same time, but again, from the bottom-up understanding, we're in space-time, so talking about this feedback dynamics. He's also talking phrases like micro-wormhole entanglement structures of these multiple space-time coordinates, and how that's how you get to the assemblies of living cells and on up across all scales. Mind blown yet? Enough history. Little comic relief for you. I saw this floating on the internet. I thought it was hilarious. It's my kind of humor. So what do we know so far? So far, there's many diverse theories out there, and I'm going to be a little repetitive so you walk out of the room actually remembering some of this stuff. All things have a wave-particle duality. It's the material, behind the material reality is really the waves, the energy field reality. And it's that domain that gives rise to our form. So as we shift domains, we shift forms, we shift bodies. Time and space are relative, they are not absolute, and consciousness is being seen as the fundamental field. So if I really slow down now and give you some concepts in a little bit more basic understanding, it's remember, energy is power. Quantum simply means they're dealing with quantities of energy, such as a quantity of light is a photon. And I notice that we're really dealing with spheres within spheres within spheres, kind of like analogous to clocks within clocks within clocks. And energy quantum is associated with frequency. It all has its own specific frequency. Higher frequency means faster, not just what we thought it intuitively felt like, but even in physics that's true. Slower is lower. And photons are thought to mediate between consciousness as a field at large and consciousness within our human realm because they exist in such a wide array of frequencies. So in all things having a wave-particle duality, how does physics really see this? Well, they see subatomic particles as packets of energy with wave-like properties in probabilistic orbitals, which is why, since they're thinking math, they're coming up with statistical wave functions. On the other hand, waves can be described as particle-like with a discrete quantum of energy depending on the frequency. Now I want to point out Penrose and Hameroff says neither particle nor wave adequately conveys the true nature of a basic quantum entity, but we kind of have to use those words. And the deep relation between these energy levels and frequencies that underlies the wave-particle duality, this is inherent in quantum phenomena. So as I think maybe Eben pointed out today, the funny thing is the more you go into what we think is a particle, right? It started out thinking that atoms were building blocks. We were looking for bricks, but we never found bricks. We just kept finding space. And they really do say that 99.9999% is space. And like Neil deGrasse Tyson pointed out on his Cosmos series, which I loved that, but he was standing in the cathedral and he was saying, you see that little dust mite that's floating in the light beam? That's the particle, and the cathedral is the space. It really is that mind-blowing. But yet when we go look in that little dust particle, it too is made of a cathedral volume of space compared to that little tiny speck. More than that, they're finding that in less than a proton volume of space is more power than in all the material known universe combined. Let me repeat that. In less than a proton volume of space lies more power than in all the material known universe combined. So imagine the power that you are made of. Imagine when we really start tapping in to that kind of power.
And where is that power coming from?
We'll talk about that. So the fundamental nature is energy, isn't it? And we really are energy or mass in how we appear, depending on the speed of our light. So how does the wave become the particle? Well, that is the question, isn't it? That's what they're trying to answer. Their language is waves of potentiality collapse into objects of space-time. So we're going from non-local to more local through the observer effect. Now, in the classical view, quantum objects don't exist until they're measured, which isn't very intuitive to most of us. And that's why they talk about they don't exist, but then there's a collapse of the wave function, then all of a sudden it exists somehow with the observer effect. But the quantum holographic view, which probably helps most of us in this room, the quantum objects are real and that there are infinite levels of existence. And basically the transformation of energy is happening from the enfolded potentials in the frequency or spectral domains, they call it, to these unfolded coordinates in space and time. And again, mediated by these dynamic feedback loops of information, and specifically the role of photons. You too have a wave-particle duality. You have all these dimensions happening all at once. Now this happens to be a picture of when I landed in France, and there's this big old orb next to me, and when I blew it up, I thought that was kind of fascinating. A consciousness map might be helpful for us because we are experiencing our body in space-time, and we are experiencing our souls beyond space-time. So I find it, that the verification of non-locality, entanglement, and some kind of quantum interconnectedness, thank goodness that they're actually finding that, because now we can say, no wonder we're getting these spiritual downloads, no wonder we're getting our intuition. That happened to be an orb that came in my camera in France at one of the, I was listening to a concert, this beautiful concert, and it was in this beautiful cathedral, and that was the orb that showed up among many. So self-information is transformed from one level to another, isn't it? And there's different types of energy. So when you hear physicists talk about types of energy, they really are talking electrical, magnetic, photonic, torsion, but also chemical, kinetic, potential mechanical, but also gravitational. And think of all the ones we haven't even discovered yet. One thing that I've probably never said out loud till right now, I'm thinking of it, so I'm going to say it, is I've just noticed how interesting it is that just like an electric field and a magnetic field kind of meet up at these 90-degree angles, I'm noticing that when you keep switching energy to a 90-degree angle, it's almost like magic happens and it switches into another field entirely. But that's just a thought. So you have the electromagnetic light spectrum, and we have to remember that the electromagnetic spectrum is a very broad spectrum, and what is visible is that tiny, tiny, tiny little sliver. Now, as a little girl learning about that, I kept looking around the room saying, is this lost on everybody but me? Because doesn't that seem pretty profound that most all of everything is invisible? Then why are we discounting it so much, and why are we placing so much importance on what's visible? But that's just me. But electromagnetism obeys rules of time and space, which is why we're still having sluggishness on our paradigm shifts. And then, of course, torsion, right? We do have torsion aspects of self. Now, what's interesting is, I remember when I was reading Einstein's book of relativity, it was interesting because I think it was in an appendix or something, but he actually said it's not that light can't travel faster than C, it's just that we can't measure it any faster. So let's come up with this constant and just go with it for our mathematical equations. But even he wasn't thinking that that was really as fast as light could go. Evidence of the biofield, and that term came up for National Institute of Health in 1994. It is a field of energy and information. We've established that, and it is related to health processes. And the interactions that are happening are crossing these hierarchical levels. So from the quantum subatomic through the organismic to the cosmic. Now, with respect to the biofield, I thought this was an interesting statement. Because quantum physics underlies all electromagnetic theories, and thus biochemistry and neurobiology, quantum mechanical processes, the role of the vacuum, and interpretations concerning the role of mind itself are important aspects to consider. Go figure. So if I really break it down now, keep you some points, the role of resonant entrainment is really important for us understanding our experiences. So remember, energy moves in waves of vibration. Frequency just means how fast are they moving, okay? And there's slower and there's faster. And energy carries information. Guess what happens next? So there, if you have waves, again, if they're like dolphins that are swimming, where the peaks and the valleys are really lined up, waves become in resonance. And magic happens because then they share information, and then they start having a mutual vibratory effect on one another. Guess what that means for us? We're becoming collective fields and in collective bandwidths at that time, right? That's how synchronization happens. That's how collective consciousness and things like telepathy and intuition and what have you happen. Now, interference patterns, these waves do meet up, right? So some cancel one another out, are called destructive interference if you're trying to read the physics literature, and constructive ones amplify. Now that's important, where two or more are gathered. So when you start noticing that we're linking up, and we literally are on the same wavelength, the amplitudes of our energies are more than any of them alone. Okay, this is important. From all the work at Heart Math, we know hearts can entrain bodies, brains can entrain, hearts can entrain brains, brains can entrain bodies, one person can entrain another. Music can definitely entrain our hearts. And so to me, it's not a metaphor. I was one with the heart of God, or I'm following the beat of my soul. This is literal. Coherence is the next step that happens. Once we understand resonance and entrainment, things start moving towards coherence. And at that point in time, we are these coordinated points in space and time. We are integrated, we are unified, and we are working as a whole system or collective. We are like a laser of light, not a scattered light of a flashlight. And there's amazing power that happens with coherence. Look at tornadoes, look at hurricanes. That's the result of coherent energy. And to me, it's no surprise, the spin motion, okay? There's that word, torsion, spin, the word spin. All right, in a state of optimal heart coherence, we know the body is more in sync and harmony with itself, and we know that our biomagnetic field improves and our health and well-being improve. And when it comes to such a state, and energy healers are in training with Heelys that are open, it seems like the Heelys' energy bodies are really following the pattern of the healer's bodies, which is why if we're a healer and we're not in a great place, something may not happen, because we literally might not be the most coherent energy in the room at that time. Properties of the biofield: unified, coherent, quantum-like, involving non-locality, superposition, complementarity, and electromagnetic coherence is thought the necessary bridge for organizing and bridging across big and small. Intention does seem to require coherence to manifest. Particles are locally entangled, non-locally interconnected, they are entangled, they have a quantum property, and according to Radin, it's convincingly demonstrated by now. If Wikipedia gives you the way they define entanglement, they say quantum state of each particle cannot be described independently of the others, even though when the particles are separated by a large distance. I will use the term very loosely to say, let's say you take sibling quantum particles and you stick one in London and you stick one in California and you tickle the one in London, the sibling in California responds in a mirror direction. And that's what had heads being scratched, because they're like, but wait a minute, the electromagnetic waves don't even have time to travel in that time. These things are happening all at once. So mathematically, the entire system becomes unified in one quantum mechanics wave function. The role of harmonics is certainly important to understanding holographic nature. It really is like octaves of music, and vibrating things like we are usually have more than one resonant frequency. So sometimes the conversations about frequency, it's not like there's one frequency, there's harmonics to our frequency. When you hear the phrase fundamental frequency, it's the lowest resonant frequency. Now each frequency is associated with a wave pattern, and the harmonics are these frequencies with their associated wave patterns within the object. Now, I've come to see emotions as harmonics and emotions as interference patterns, because if I'm over here with my energy pattern and I'm thinking of you with yours, or I'm thinking of a movie or an idea, notice that the degree to which it coheres with mine and is in sync with mine, the degree to which I'm going to feel a positive emotion. But the degree to which it doesn't cohere with my field, it is not relevant to my field, it's not in sync with me, that's why it's going to feel unpleasant to me. It's about energy. Harmonics technically are whole number ratios of the fundamental frequency. I love the science of cymatics, the sound harmonics in the body. Probably many of you have seen how with water they'll play sounds and show up the unique patterns that show up when they play sound. Michio Kaku, string theory, he says the subatomic particles we see in nature, these quarks and electrons, they're nothing but musical notes on tiny vibrating strings. Physics is really the laws of harmony that you can write on these vibrating strings, and chemistry are the melodies you can play on interacting vibrating strings. Anirban said, it's all about a chain of vibrations, harmonics and frequencies. Consciousness is really a network of flutes. Even the neurons are changing structure all the time, and they're like compositions of music. The body is a string of vibrations. Now, David Bohm, he came out with Wholeness in the Implicate Order, and he realized about this interconnected, unbroken wholeness out there, and he called that the implicate order. That is what he calls the non-local domain. He saw life as a holo movement, a non-local domain within local space-time as an interconnected whole. Non-local higher dimensional ground for many levels of both matter and consciousness. These different aspects of the one overall order. So truly a multidimensional reality which may project into many orders of sequence of moments in consciousness. And he saw consciousness as a series of moments. Carl Pribram, as a neuroscientist, basically said this implicate order is the spiritual domain, and it is the domain of quantum physics. And when they were doing all kinds of experiments on the brain, and then cats, monkeys, and what have you, they noticed that the transformations are happening from the spectral or the frequency domains to the local domain of time and space. He found within the dendrite networks, particularly patch holography happening, and he said the information storage for the mind, for memory or what have you, it really is non-locally distributed through these frequency ranges, it really isn't just in one place of the brain. Now that was back in '74, and look where we still are with people not, kind of ignoring that information. Even he recognized the parts were entangled. So here is the key defining point for a hologram and why it's important to every single one of us. The information for the whole lies within each part. So if we truly are holographic and consciousness is holographic, then we are the part with our own identity, but we are also the whole with an amazing ability to sense the collective at the same time and our particular part in the whole. All is important and vital. We really are light within light, and we are projections and holograms of light. Stan Isloff-Grof said holotropic states. He likes that term better than altered or non-ordinary, and basically because it means moving towards wholeness. And he did all kinds of research on different states with LSD and all kinds of experiments that way, but he said we really do only identify with this very small fraction of who we are. And after 50 years of his work, he said there are so many different kinds of phenomena out there that they really do call into question our basic metaphysical assumption of materialistic science. He also said, yes, there's a lot of resistance in the academic community, and it makes sense because the necessary revisions are basically going to have to be a complement to exactly what happened in physics. So that's my field, psychotherapy, kind of where we are today. The revolution hasn't quite happened yet. Some of us are getting there. Penrose and Hamroff's theory is really, really difficult to understand, probably for even them. But in case you're wondering what the nature of consciousness is and you run into this theory, I'm just going to point out a few things here. So for them, consciousness is central to the physical nature of the universe, but Eben wouldn't like it because they do talk about proto-consciousness. But they talk about how conscious experience is the fundamental additional ingredient possibly missing in quantum mechanics. They're trying to unite the conventional view, which I told you about, with general relativity, and they call it orchestrated objective reduction. Now, objective reduction, OR, really means collapse of the wave function, but they don't want to call it collapse of the wave function because they see the quantum object as already being real. Now, the gravitational part is that within the tubulin, they're noticing gravitational self-energy. They see consciousness as a series of discrete objective reduction events in concert with the neuronal activities that are happening. And definitely those tubulins that are oscillating synchronistically are giving us a biological coherence. They also talk about between conscious moments, there's these quantum superpositions, so you can kind of see them holding on to the quantum mechanics language. Quantum superpositions of microtubule states, then a quantum state reduction, then a moment of conscious awareness. The energy at those levels, they say, plays a very different role, and it's orchestrating the conscious moment. And they definitely implicate gamma synchrony ranges, and even that entanglement is happening between the neurons via the gap junctions, which they say synchronize electrical processes and engage the gamma synchrony. In 2012, Facco and Agrillo said, okay, near-death experience facts are truly incompatible with the ruling reductionist stance, and consciousness is only recently being studied in neuroscience. Boy, do we know very little about mind, and we know even less about spirituality. It really seems like we're waiting for this paradigm shift, but really a lot of facts have to be incompatible with the accepting paradigm before we have our shift. So hopefully we're all working towards that. Dean Radin said, you know what, is it possible in principle for mind to be separated from the brain? Absolutely. He said the cumulative experimental database strongly indicates that it can. Now I happened to put a picture there, I'm not sure why, but I felt called to put a picture there of an orb that was next to me. As I was sitting in a restaurant, somebody took a picture, and it was an orb that when I magnified it looked like this, and I would love to hear if anybody's seen any kind of orbs like this, because I never have, but it kind of looks like this intertwined heart with like a little mini tornado in the middle. I was just fascinated by it. So how do we define consciousness technically? Well, Stanford's Tiller says Consciousness is the capacity to channel and transfer information from various energy types that we've talked about throughout multiple domains. So we know we have physical, etheric, emotional, mental, spiritual. He uses that language. So it's very much a multidimensional model, and he associates qualities of consciousness with unique frequency bands. He basically says, what is higher consciousness? It's a greater channel and bandwidth capacity. Now, Claude Swanson, who's an MIT physicist, says consciousness is the ability to steer the phase of impinging background energy. This enables a conscious entity to create and maintain its own energy pattern. I like to call that hold our light steady. And to impose this energy pattern on the outside environment and even on distant matter. So in his definition, consciousness, higher consciousness, is a greater ability to hold our energy and light steady and affecting others even non-locally. I love that Maharishi effect. Square root of 1% of us can have an effect on population. So quantum holographic consciousness, Bandyopadhyay again says, we really need to study the whole wheel of frequencies at the heart of structures if we're going to understand consciousness. And the brain is an oscillator. And this was as recently as last year's Science of Consciousness conference when I saw him. That's pretty much the most advanced thing that was said at the entire conference, I think. So how have I come to synthesize the view of everything that I'm learning and synthesize it with psychology? To me, we can argue about what consciousness is and what it isn't, but at the very least, what we know for sure, it's energy carrying information. We do know that. And that it is multidimensional, and it's holographic, and it's certainly non-local to local domains. And there's so much evidence that the brain, in fact, every single cell actually, every atom, it's all working to be an energy receiver transmitter. It's really a quantum processor. And I like to liken it to an old-fashioned call switchboard. So yeah, we can see where the calls or the activity in the brain is happening, but we shouldn't confuse correlation with causation. Non-local domain is primary for sure. Quantum field of potentiality, quantum vacuum, we can use those words when we have experiences that in other domains. Energies are transduced locally from one form to another, but as we know, they're all happening all at once. So our multidimensional nature is all happening all at once, but that has great implication for meditation and why you can access other states, and all of us can learn how to access states at will and transcend in any given moment. We just need to practice. And really, all these energies are going from God to eventually torsion, photonic, magnetic, electric. It just gets slower and slower. And to me, this is just me, not physics, but when I think of Einstein and theory of relativity, why do we experience a local reality of space-time in this way that seems so slow? We're all moving at around the same relative resonant frequency. So theory of relativity seems to explain it, if you ask me. So certainly the local domain of electromagnetism and matter is secondary, and as you can tell, I put extreme importance on the fact that we're having resonance and entrainment and collective fields, and those of us that are really tuning into one another, tuning into energies, that's really important for us. The fact that these energetic blueprints are the templates for our form, again, is very important to understand what is forming our subtle bodies, what is forming our physical bodies. What shifts as consciousness shifts, the type of energy, the kind of information, and resonant frequency. So I'm going to give you a consciousness map, not that I'm going to belabor this today, it happens to be in my book, but what I really want us to get out of that, I've kind of used this as a tool talking with clients. So when we kind of think of chakras, we can borrow that language today. We can think of these beautiful intake and outtake valves of energy, spheres within spheres within spheres of energy is what we really are. And basically, the first three domains of egoic consciousness are simply the electromagnetic field. And that's why we have experiences that seem to be within time and space. But when we jump in consciousness, we have other more collective. To me, when the heart chakra opens, we enter the collective domain. No wonder then telepathy, intuition, remote viewing, precognition happens. We're within the states of collective consciousness. And I don't know about you, I'm just glad to know that there's physicists out there that say, hey, we have other energies like torsion, and that explains the non-local energies that we're tapping in. And it's kind of cool that it's related to spin for maybe some of our spiritually transformative experiences. So the summary so far, due to our holographic nature, these experiences are possible, and we can ascend into collective interconnected consciousness. That happened to be an orb I took after my father died, and I was going around taking pictures of my house, and that just happened to be one of them. So how does this, in my way of looking at things, how does this relate to love? Well, I really do see love as the unifying aspect. That is the unifying aspect of quantum holographic consciousness. So light energy is the energy which coheres all forms, possibly via the photons. It is the multidimensional and holographic array of light that we see out there, where information for the whole really does live within each part of us, where formlessness of the quantum field of potentiality really takes pattern form endlessly as this dance of co-creation. It is the union of spirit life with the body, and it is the cross where time intersects space. Perhaps it's our clue to quantum gravity, biological binding, and mini black hole of the proton. Perhaps it really is the quantum field of consciousness as a whole, the source of form, and therefore all healing. Let's see, I don't have time to do this poem. I'll skip that. But love does seem to heal, doesn't it? Now, William Bengston, for those of you that might know him, he did a lot of experiments where he injected mice with basically a particularly 100% deadly form of mammary cancer. And as a non-believer, he was able to also teach grad students how to heal these mice, and it sounds like he was 100% effective. That's pretty daggone good. Now, when you talk to a lot of healers, they'll say that their most effective healing sessions seem to be when they lost their personal sense of awareness and went into the high states of unconditional love, right, where we go into unity consciousness. The healing effects, Association for Comprehensive Energy Psychology has a lot of information out about the growing body of evidence with tapping. As far as where are we in evidence with hands-on healing, there are many studies out there, but according to Radin, there's really just too few controlled studies on any one protocol. Some amazing synthesizing books out there by Tiller Swanson and James Oshman. Science and Human Transformation really integrates a lot of esoteric with quantum physics and what we know now. Claude Swanson talks a lot about torsion, and Energy Medicine by James Oshman really meets us at the biophoton, the body level. So as a psychotherapist, some of the struggles that I saw over and over and over again are some of these that I've listed here. Reality really has turned upside down, hasn't it? We really don't think we fit in, and we're really sick and tired of hearing that we're crazy, and especially if we go to therapists being told we are crazy. Maybe hospitalized. I've had way too many of my clients get hospitalized. We do sometimes get really despair. Sometimes there's a lot of grief having to live on this plane when we've experienced domains of amazing love. There really are shifting definitions of love and relationship happening out there, right? Those that we don't resonate with seem to fall out of our life, and maybe the new are coming in, but they might not be there yet, and it's really scary. Sometimes we glimpse such perfection, we try to have perfection here on this plane. That's going to drive us crazy. Self-love, we get confused with selfishness, and sometimes we go the other way and get too enmeshed. Many, many examples of all of these, though. We really do experience internal shifts in values, don't we, and things that make us happy. We really are kind of upping the harmonics from our first chakras going into our higher chakras. Our values are shifting from material to spiritual, certainly. And we are really struggling with a lot of subtle energy imbalances and energy boundaries. And usually we're trying to figure out now what to do with our old career and how do we move into a new, because we usually want to do something with whatever we've discovered. And there's a lot of questions about a law of attraction. I'm just going to say it's all about the energy. So how would I leave us as far as guidance for healthcare professionals? Please, and especially those of you who might be watching at home, please listen non-judgmentally and do no harm. Sit with the person, listen to them. Don't worry about the content. I don't care if they're talking about aliens, other dimensions. I don't care if they're talking about Pleiades. I don't care what they're talking about. Listen and just notice if everything else seems fine with this person. You can speak rationally. It's a different story. I mean, even I've diagnosed schizophrenia. If somebody can't even track a conversation, if somebody goes off on some word salad, okay, something else is going on there. But certainly, I think we should err on caution here and stop doing so much harm. We do have to differentiate between spiritual emergence and spiritual emergency. We can be in crisis, right? We can have spiritual emergence and also be in crisis and even have to be hospitalized. We need to ground. That's not the time to do yoga and meditation as far as I'm concerned. And we do need scientific language. So the more we can start sharing, as Tiller advised us, these scientifically grounded terms for explaining what is going on for us, then it'll probably help the field of psychotherapy get with the program a little bit more. And we need to recognize who is ready for transformation and who's not. We all have a lot of work to do at the very level that we are. So I thank you so much for allowing me to be here, for allowing me to kind of go on this thing, this journey, and let it rip and talk about more advanced things and not just the basics. I'm so honored and thrilled to be here, so thank you. And I'm happy to take questions if anybody has any. No? What's that? I am happy to take questions until you kick me out.
Would you like to talk? The difference between electromagnetic energy and subtle energies, and what we're dealing with here in light of what you've been talking about, which is which?
I will. So electromagnetic is really specifically electrical fields, magnetic fields, and then we could also describe photons in that bandwidth. We could say that, and we do know that the biofield is that. So on one level, it is starting to get into subtle energy because it's not the body, it's the energy bandwidths of this body. So that is the electromagnetic field. At the same time, I think it's a mistake for us to say that our aura or our biofield is only electromagnetic, because the research isn't there yet, but obviously the way we know energy is all existing, clearly torsion and maybe superluminal photons and what have you, clearly those are engaging, in our biofield. Thank you for the question.
You're incredibly fluent.
Oh, thank you.
And I just wonder if you would just take a moment or two to trace sort of your background from the 6-year-old. I know you two, did you major in physics in college? Or where did you go to college? How did you become, I know you're the psychotherapist, but on the physics end, I mean, how did you develop all that, and did you ever work in this field?
So I'll answer that in a short way. On one hand, what I don't know, one psychic left my office saying, you were in Atlantis and you were part of what blew up everything because you were working with those energies there. So I don't know, maybe I kind of came in with some of that. But at the same time, what I remember in this life is just the experience of the holographic reality and the experience of the geometries and the experience of like feeling the presence. And yet, you know what, I was in grief so often that basically today I kind of said is my coming out party, because I learned to be silent. I had no one to talk to about any of this. Anytime I started just little Valerie blabbering about all of this, I would get the deer in headlights stare. I would be like the eye roll, the wacko, crazy. And I just learned to be quiet about it. And I just literally jumped into kind of physics as my hobby. Now, I didn't major in it in college. I actually majored in business, but I think that was because, and that's why I think a lot of us undergo career confusion and career changes, because I remember my father at the time, who grew up World War II Marine and practical from the Depression and all that, right? I remember him saying if a woman wants a degree or wants to get a degree, or if she wants to get a job, she better major in business. Well, what I realized later is he actually meant like secretarial school, but I dutifully went to University of Florida and got my degree in business, only to be miserable. I eventually made my way. first started an imported chocolate distributorship and did business things like that for a while, but eventually I wasn't happy until I moved to the environmental engineering field because I loved the environment, right? When we're here, we love the environment, and so I kind of found that at least there, I could feel like I was doing some good with the environment. But I won't even it's a whole nother story to tell you the nightmares that happened within the environmental engineering field that made me say, I'm just going to work one-on-one to try to raise the consciousness on this planet. And the universe was kicking me in the butt a lot about that. I'll tell you one little thing. It's in the book, but I'll tell you this one little thing that happened. It was just kind of all these synchronicities and all these messages that you get from the universe. But this one was like, all right, already. So I had gone out probably for my regular fast food McDonald's lunch at the time in that business, and I'm coming back. I'm coming up in the elevator. It's only 4 stories. It felt like it lasted forever. But I'm going in this elevator, this woman is coming in, and she is staring at me. She is boring holes in my head. And so finally I said, excuse me, may I help you? And she said, are you Dr. Smith, the psychiatrist? I said, no, I'm sorry, I'm not, thinking that'll be that. Are you sure you're not Dr. Smith? Pretty sure. Are you sure you're not a psychiatrist? No, not a psychiatrist. Psychologist? Counselor? Something? No, not. And it just kept going. I'm like, how long is it going to take to get to the 4th floor? So when she got out on the 3rd floor, her last words to me were, I can't just believe you're not that because you just have that aura. And I remember going, all right already. So eventually I still needed a few more kicks in the butt to leave the environmental engineering field and kind of go into psychology. But I think I was always really guided to help people, and physics is my hobby. Literally, my friends laugh at me. Those are my beach reading books. I don't read fiction. I'm just always all about energies and gobbling up as much as I can. So thank you very much. And I'm happy to answer more questions in the bookstore.
Yeah.